blah, blah, blah. It works. Awesome. So, hello, and people will be slowly floating in, but that's okay. Welcome to my talk called Social Mental Models for Developers. This is a completely new talk because there's some history behind it, but we'll get through that. My name is Andrzej Grzesik. I know most of you can pronounce this name and spell it correctly. For those of you that can't, I usually go by Ax because people from outside Poland have a bit of a problem with the number of vowels and the number of consonants. I work at a company called LMAX, which is an exchange written in Java. We'll talk about it in a second. I have Twitter, I have email. If you would like the slides, drop me an email, ask for me for a copy. Very happy to do that. And I say that I build distributed systems, which means working with people and computers, because you can't do one well without the other, which means you have to do both, or I have to do both. But it's actually quite fun. Icons I identify with are those. I'm very proud of having a Java champion logo in there. Apart from that, run a conference, I'm involved in JAX, speaking at conferences, and so on and so on. And I mentioned LMAX, which if you know LMAX, you know. If you don't, it's an exchange, so a place where people and organizations can trade FX, some crypto, some digital assets. This is a system that has an uptime of 100%, so it's always up. It just doesn't fail. And it has an average latency according to that web page under 85 microseconds. 85 micro, not milli, which is 1,000 of a milli, which is not a lot, and it's written in Java. So if somebody tells you that, hey, Java is slow, well, we're using it. It's very fast, and Java is very convenient, actually a perfect language to do a system like that. And it's been written in Java for a long time, and it works. And if we were to rewrite it, we were to rewrite it in Java again. If you have any questions about the talk, or if I start speaking too quickly, there is one gesture that you can safely use, which is that. Just signal that I started going too fast. I sometimes do that, especially when I get some nerves. I sometimes might have a very dry joke, which is a reminder for me that I need to drink. And so, well, why this talk now? Because if you've been doing software, if you've been doing software with people, there are some ways that you can quantify or approach a team that you're dealing with, or maybe a set of new colleagues, which would just help. There is a whole conference track focusing on soft skills, so I didn't have to cover a lot of things, and I actually carved some things out because they seem to be covered in other talks today. But I've been managing groups of up to 400 people plus, usually smaller, but if you have to deal with a lot of people, you have to, well, figure out how to do things efficiently, which means mental models help because they are a way that you help assess reality and deal with reality with. It's a tool. And if you want your colleagues to be smart and exciting and entertaining and so on, well, there are two ways. You can hire the correct people and hope nothing goes wrong, or you can help them grow in a certain direction. Which means, yeah, hiring has a limit, especially if the company claims to be on a hiring freeze or zero interest rates are no more, and so on and so on. But the body of people that you have, and if they discover that learning and growing is a journey and then it's enjoyable, then, well, you maybe not open a Pandora box, but it's a thing that keeps on giving and it's usually fun. I'll be very happy if one of those results happens. So if you start reading, have some curiosity increase, or maybe start thinking about things. I don't expect to tell you all the things and all the facts. So let's talk about learning, because that's going to be the focus of today. There are many models with regards to learning that exist in science, in management, and so on. I've picked two that I see work for me when dealing with software teams in general, and they have been working for me for, I don't know, 15 years plus. The first one is this. I cannot read this, but I thought I had to quote it. If anybody does martial arts and they know what Shuhari stands for, nobody. Shuhari is a model that talks about skill acquisition. It talks about skill acquisition and mastery, which goes in three phases. The phases are called Shu, Ha, and Ri, hence the name. And it actually matches people learning software. This is not my invention, this is not my discovery, but I seem to use it and I seem to explain it to things to people with it, and it seems to work and stick very well. So the first phase is called SHU, which stands for protect or obey, and it's learning the fundamentals. When you learn a programming language, you have to learn the syntax, you have to learn how to, I don't know, run Java C, how to execute a program. Maybe if you live and breathe through the IDE, how do you do that? The basics. What are the basic movements? How do you do that? And the answers that the person is seeking to what and how. What are the actions? How do you execute the basic movements? So you know how to do, you know what to do. If you want to drive a car, well, you have to learn to open it, you have to learn to start the engine, you have to learn to drive it straight, you have to learn to do turns, and only then you can build on top of that. Basic foundation. I guess quite self-explanatory. Then you have SHU, which is, as we said, in Java or in software, this means learning the rules, as I said, language, reading books like Effective Java, learning best practices. What are the things that we do? What are the basic building blocks that we will be doing, that we will be building upon? If somebody is doing martial arts, those are the thousands of repetitions of all the basic movements and small combinations of basic movements, because you want to automate them, because they have to be just automated without any thinking. How do you get to that level? Through something called deliberate practice. You keep doing the same thing over and over. A violinist or any musician will keep practicing because they want to get exactly through that level. They have to have their basic skills at extremely good level. How do you do practice in software? Apart from working, you can do focused learning. You might have heard of different kind of katas, so forms, specific exercises, which are focused on practicing some aspect. Code katas, architectural katas, code retreats, maybe 1 billion role challenge. Those are all examples of deliberate practice. So something that's not going to deliver a product, but the goal of the activity is practicing. Is anybody unfamiliar with code katas or architectural katas here? No hands, so everybody's still asleep. Good. So that we're all on the same page. Code kata is an exercise, like something like, for example, trying to test if something is an anagram and trying to maybe TDD the exercise. The problem is not difficult. It's trivial. Trying to apply TDD to it might feel a bit awkward. The whole point is to practice and to expose yourself to the awkward, because once you've done this in a safe space and you can then delete the code because really it's not really useful after, you've learned something. You've exercised it, you've practiced this, and then you can do it on a next exercise and next exercise, and so on and so on. There is a bunch of repositories that mention code katas on GitHub and on the internet. And in places I've worked, we've done them. We've done them on Fridays. We've done them sometimes on Saturdays. We've done those practices as a learning exercise, sometimes once, sometimes a couple times. A code retreat is a specific format that's basically a day of having 5 or 6 forms with different people of similar kind of exercises. And we've had a couple of them in Krakow long time ago when I was still living here. Same goes for architecture katas. How do you become an architect? Well, A, through a promotion, but B, okay, I'm an architect, now what? Well, I will be designing things. How do you get better at designing? By practicing. So there are exercises for that. So there is a whole repository of problems, and there are some people who facilitate architecture kata. So sometimes on a meetup or around a conference, you might have some people running an architecture kata exercise. And it's exactly as you would expect. There is a design problem, and you try to come up with a design. Why? So that you practice writing it, maybe drawing diagrams and explaining it to other people. They will ask you questions. And this is exactly like real work, except for it's not real work, and that's the whole point. So we know. Another thing that I've used with success was trying to do Project Euler using TDD. If you don't know, Project Euler is mathematics puzzles. It starts with very simple, then they grow in complexity. And you do numeric puzzles. You have to, you come up with a result, you enter the result at the website, it gives you a tick. There are no rewards, this is not a speed competition, this is not a competitive coding in any way. It's usually quite easy, sometimes it requires a bit of thinking. The whole point is to practice using the language and battling with the software. What I used to do is, with another person, we used to TDD this. TDDing a numerical problem, it's very unnatural, and that was the whole point. We wanted to practice TDD, get better at it, and we wanted to try to use the language and the platform and learn at the same time. Why? Again, the goal was to learn. So somebody who has been doing this for a long time, or has been practicing for some amount of time, and at some point they will say, either I don't know this movie, or they will actually quote something from this movie, and they will say, I think I've practiced enough. I think I should be pretty good now, right? And the question that follows is, how can I tell whether I know? Well, another person can do something very easy. Ask, show me what you know, show me that what you believe is good, why do you believe this is good? Usually that person at the very first stage has to be an expert so that they already know what is good. Because if two people who are very newbie at driving, one coaches the other, then we will have very interesting situations on the road. That's not how it goes. We know why, because consequences would be terrible. If two junior engineers each coach each other and then they decide, hey, I believe you're a senior, and then in return I also believe you're a senior, that's not how you become a senior developer. You know why, you know the consequences. Same goes for most of exercises. So here comes level number 2, or second level. It's called Ha. So we're in the middle of Shuhari. That's breaking with tradition, detachment from the illusions to self, breaking with tradition, blah, blah, blah. When the basic movements are established and ingrained into a person, then you can start to deviate. Asking, okay, I've always solved this problem in this way. Could I solve it differently? Could I do something else? And so on and so on. For example, a software example. If you've seen Dune, you know. If you haven't, then this is a scene in which there is pain involved. The reflex is to take the hand out of the box, but the mind can control the hand not to take it, to demonstrate that the mind actually has control over the ingrained reflexes. Same things happen. If you ask somebody who is very well used to solving problems in a certain way, they will say, hey, I will use Spring and Hibernate before you even tell me what the problem is. Sometimes this works, but sometimes it doesn't. The goal of that stage is to develop, hey, can I see where the boundaries for certain actions are? Can I do this? Can I do that? What happens if I do that? Do I know the consequences? Does not my mental model involve that? And so on and so on. Examples for software, doing a Raspberry Pi, having a home lab, trying to install Linux that you've never used, trying to do, I don't know, Linux from scratch, Arc, whatever you want. Or if you've never used Windows, trying to actually use Windows and do something with it. Emotions that result are part of the learning, let's call it that way. Some companies have Friday learning, some companies encourage people to do exercises and learning. Why? Because people want to have a better mental model, understand what they do and what happens if, so that when a decision like that comes in their normal work, they know what happens if, because they already know. And then comes the very last moment. In the Shuhari, separate transcendence. There are no techniques, everything is esoteric, because the person is knowing everything so well that they just naturally move through space and time because they know what happens. They know about consequences. When somebody mentions a problem and somebody already thinks about a solution, they already know, no, this is going to break. If you like Dune, well, you know why prescience. If you don't, because, hey, I'm going to use Kafka to put this through a container on Kubernetes. No. And then you have to spend half an hour explaining, or an expert has to spend a half an hour of explaining why this is not going to work. But because the person at that level already knows all the connections, and in their brain they are fully formed, they know why this is not the correct way. It's just the explanation takes sometimes more time. And this all goes well. Sometimes pathologies degenerate, but we'll cover the pathologies using the second model. So before I get there, well, a reminder for myself. No questions? Great. Let's keep going. So you all know, or you might have felt already, that models are not perfectly accurate, but some of them are useful. Same goes to here. They are not perfect evaluations or perfect explanation about how people acquire skills, but that's not the point. They help in conversations. One very important thing if you have to manage, lead, coach, mentor, is people are not their skills. Somebody who is a good developer might be a bad person, and somebody who is a completely terrible coder might be an okay person. And the fact that they cannot code for anything, it doesn't mean that we should be not nice to them. Keep being nice to each other. Self-explanatory, but then still surprising to some people. So when that happens, when we look at a journey and somebody is growing, there is a model called the Dreyfus model, which is coming from the 80s by the Dreyfus brothers, who were doing some investigation and research in the military in the US. They have written books, they've written papers. It is wrong. It's been proven to be wrong, as in factually describing what happens, but it's also very useful because it presents a ladder of skill acquisition. The ladder has 5 stages. They are called novice, advanced, beginner, competent, proficient, and expert. And it gives a nice foundation about thinking about growth, which means it's useful as a stepping stone. It's not the end goal, but in the recent year, I've spoken to a lot of people who, when I mentioned the Dreyfus model, they had no clue what I'm talking about. So out of curiosity, have you heard of the Dreyfus model before? I know you have because I've asked you yesterday, but I see 4 hands in the room. So this is a stepping stone. If it helps you convey things to people, it's great, but this is not how people tick, but it's a stepping stone and it's useful. So with Dreyfus model, the first one is called novice. A formal definition quoted from Wikipedia or maybe the book. I think if the book is here, then it's from the book. Recognize objective facts relevant to the skill. So driving, how do you start the car? How do you accelerate? How do you stop? Acquires rules for determining actions based upon facts and features. If revolutions of the engine go through certain range, you have to switch gears. It's a hard rule. There is nothing more there. This is how people early on operate. Following rule requires concentration because you're starting. You have to pay attention. You have to build the muscle memory. You have to know how to shift gears. You have to focus. Okay, this, that. It's terribly slow to look at, or painful maybe even if you're an expert already, but the person it's effort. It's conscious effort. And the person who is there evaluates themselves. How well do I think I applied the rules? The rules are the thing. The rules have no context. Person is unaware of consequences. Somebody told the person to shift gears at 30. They will always shift gears at 30 because 30 was the magic number that somebody gave them. Nobody is going to question why 30, can it be 25? What does it depend on? Software examples. Always use primitives, never wrapper types. Well, yes, maybe, but. If you know that this is not really true, but somebody who's learning, somebody who's starting, they need simple rules because they are not ready yet to get the more complex rules. So that also presents a very big danger in software because somebody's going to evaluate other people in how well they adhere to the rules that are there. So if you ask a junior who only follows very strict rules to evaluate interview candidates, they are going to see, okay, do you know the rules? Do you apply them? If you don't apply the rules, therefore you're not a good developer. And it's not their fault that they don't know. How it transfers, how it manifests. If somebody says, you shall never, you should always, and there is no bending available, then somebody might be floating around this level. Another example, relational database, I must always normalize fully. It is possible to do relational databases differently, but somebody who's just started, somebody who has been just taught the basic rules, they only know them and they think, they perceive the world through them. How does somebody learn at that level? They learn more rules because they want to be able to do more, so they take on more rules, and they want to apply the rules to build experience, to do them more automatically. Using the car example, you practice shifting gears, it becomes an easier and easier and easier example. The great thing about that stage is it's very enjoyable Because if you're starting to learn something, your gains initially are very high because you're learning something. Everything is new, which means it's endorphins all the time. And it feels good. And somebody thinks that they are making very good progress at first. The problem is progress will slow down. And that's expected, that's normal, that's built in. So somebody who has been practicing enough, they will get to stage number 2 or level number 2 called advanced beginner, in which they have more complex rules. For example, shifting gear based on the engine sound, not specific value of revolutions. Rules have some context, which is harder to explain, as in how do you make a turn in the traffic. As in explaining that on paper will take half a page if you want to be reasonably precise, or maybe 2 pages, or maybe you can write an essay, or maybe make a movie about how to turn correctly in certain roundabouts in Krakow. But they know, and they know it without those rules having been made extremely explicit. They still follow rules. The catalog is bigger, and they will notice some situations and patterns, and they will react according to the pattern. I notice this, I do that. If then kind of examples. Connections are not codified in rules, so there is no hard and fast way to explain the sound of the engine, again, using the shifting examples. But there is one thing, there is no hierarchy. The rules they are all rules. This is the truth. This is how you operate. So how do they learn? They keep applying rules. They learn to apply them with ease. So they want to be as comfortable as shifting gears, or maybe printing a line in Java. They will seek more rules. They will seek rules which are richer, not only trivial things, and they will binge on best practices. They want to know what rules are there. They want to know what rules to apply when, and keep doing and keep doing and keep doing. How do they communicate when two people at this level meet? They will exchange the rules. I know this and that and that, and I know those are my scenarios that I'm aware of. And those are my scenarios that I'm aware of. And then they talk about it, and you can see that everybody's excited. You can see sparks in the eyes. And you can imagine 2 Spanish inquisitors meeting and telling their secret techniques to detect witches. It might not be entirely correct, but they will be very passionate about it. The passion is great. The danger is the zeal and the lack of context, because they don't have the context. And then, if everything worked correctly, and people at level 1 and level 2, under the careful eye of the expert, have progressed, somebody is going to reach level number 3 called competence. So having a hierarchy of rules, knowing what to apply when, having a procedure of dealing with problems they have not seen before because they know the rules, they will select the rules and they will apply them. Being able to consciously select a path to reach a goal. If you talk driving, if I want to get from here to, I don't know, to Rynek, you have a couple ways to do it. Somebody with experience, I'm from Krakow, I will not think about going there, I'll just go and take a tram. But if somebody who's not familiar with Krakow, they will have to study the map, they will have to make a decision, and then a thing that is present on this level is people care about the decision because it involved an effort. And the great thing is, because it's their decision, it involves an effort, they have a feedback loop. They are curious, how is it going to play out? So arriving at a goal is a deliberate exercise, but expensive. But you can hear things like my code, my design, my architecture, my thing, my this, my that, my PR. Why did you delete my function? It makes no sense, but this is just a communication of where somebody is when it comes to growth in software. It's not, they are not fully able to appreciate shared code ownership. So somebody can call this Hamlet model of decision making. It's agonizing. Asking somebody who has just become a lead to come up with an architecture for something they don't know how to do and they've never done this before, it will require effort. Sometimes they will try to avoid it, but it will be painful for them because they've never done it, and that's okay. What we know, if we notice that, we can of course help. What you also can see is somebody who pretends to be level 3, but not really there, is just still hacking without any direction. So no direction, there is no conscious from problem to goal. Then somebody's just not there. Or somebody might be completely overwhelmed, like the aforementioned lead that is expected to make a decision or come up with a design or a problem solution. and they can't, they are overwhelmed. It might just suggest that the problem is maybe too big, or maybe they don't have a hierarchy, and they maybe need a bit of help. Too big of a problem? Well, there are two ways in which problems might be too big. If the problem has too much scope, then we can help cut it in scope. And okay, this problem is too big. Can you solve it from here to here? And if they say yes, then good. Now we are here. Can you solve it from here to here and progress? If the problem is just too complex because it has too many variables, maybe it's just too complex. Let's go to software examples. How it manifests. My favorite one is, how do you monitor your software? I ask this during interviews, and then I listen. If somebody tells me I log everything and there is no hierarchy, I just want to have all the signals recorded. Yes, it's great if you're a vendor of monitoring software because you're paying by storage. That's great, but they don't know what they want out of those signals. They just want everything recorded because that's how somebody told them. And they don't really have a hierarchy. That means they are not fully competent when it comes to metrics. What else? Somebody could say that, hey, monitoring is actually more complex than producing code. Yes, that would be true, but that's a limitation of this model. It doesn't really work with tree-like skills. But level 3, or somebody who has who's developed a hierarchy, how do they learn? They go through case studies. They want to see what was the context somebody had, how did they arrive at the decision, what happened, and then another aspect in which they apply their own learning is be forced to make a decision, then they commit to one, then they observe the results, and then they repeat. So if you're mentoring or coaching and you see somebody going through that loop, what you can do is first sponsor a feedback loop, which means put in a position in which they actually are forced to come up with a design, even if it's wrong, even if it hurts, and observe the results. If they've done it well enough, or if they've not have a terrible failure at first, expose them to a failure. Why? So that they see that the world does not end. It doesn't have to be perfect at first. Software usually is an iterative process. We can deploy another time, we can fix the bugs. If we're making progress, that's already, well, progress. And after that, start challenging their feedback loop. So somebody comes up with a design. Okay, how could you do it differently? Okay, what are the drivers? Are they all equally important? And so on and so on. If you know ADRs or any sort of design reviews, exactly the thing to do. And then you can also prevent learning or observe people being prevented or stopped from learning one way or the other. When somebody is not able to observe results of their decisions, like not seeing the projects they work reach production or see the consequences of their actions, they will not develop the last part of the feedback loop because they don't know the consequences. Project gets killed, they move companies, or they make a war file, and then it's not their problem anymore. Sometimes it happens in software. That's nobody's fault, but it means that somebody might not have developed this, which means it will affect how you interview. A long time ago, as I mentioned that, one funny thing that it leads to, which always makes me laugh, is a question that keeps coming up every JDD I remember. Can you put annotations on domain models? Like, it's a good question, but it's also a sign that this is not exactly what you're asking, because you're asking, somebody was asking on the surface and they don't understand the consequences, and that's not really, the real question is probably about the design of the app, or what, is there a problem, or is it just people exchanging rules, talking, like we talked about before. The problem with level 3 is somebody might not get there, especially if there is no expert. So in order to fully graduate or to successfully graduate, an expert is usually necessary, or it's highly unlikely for somebody to graduate successfully if there is no expert. So a group of advanced beginners might decide that I've been applying rules for 10 years, you've been applying rules for 10 years, let's declare ourselves experts, maybe because we've been in the company for 10 years, we'll call ourselves whatever, and then competence to us means rules, which means we will hire people who also follow rules because this is how we roll. They don't have the big picture, they don't know the consequences, they cannot reason about it, but companies go like that, and sometimes you might notice that. This is not great, And another manifestation of that is a radical person at the helm. So person with the most radical view is considered the best because hey, they know the rules, they are the strictest. Even if the rules make no sense. So something like corporate policy prohibits using unit tests. Somebody might laugh. Somebody who has seen that in a corporation might not laugh. What do you do if you have to deal with such a thing? Option one, if you have the time, just wait it out. Usually, zeal passes, and people, if they are in that very active, very Spanish Inquisition-like part of their lives, it passes. People grow up, people mature, whatever you want to call it. Maybe it just dies down. Open conflict usually doesn't work. People there operate if A then B, which means if you're offering a countering point of view, you're just not following the rules. You're wrong, and they will not listen to you next time. So that doesn't work. Software example, design patterns. If you've read the design pattern book, or you've seen people who have read the design pattern book, there is a phenomenon of somebody after reading, they will apply those patterns absolutely everywhere. So you put them under a glass dome for half a year, wait it out, and then, okay, you're to do software. Because people have been given the tools, they know how to connect things, they think they can reason, and it's zealous. They cannot really reason because they need to see the consequences. But in order to see the consequences, they need to apply. And we don't want them to apply every single design pattern everywhere because that will lead to overcomplication. You can replace design patterns with Kafka and gRPC or anything else, or Kubernetes, or anything else that's now popular, maybe AI, maybe LLMs. A very nice way of getting a person out of the stages, if they have a person they consider an expert, that person can very gently start challenging them, not being openly against, because then they can block mentally, but just bounce countering ideas. Hey, what about this? What about that? What about that? What about that? The point is to sometimes overwhelm, sometimes to show that, hey, there might be a different perspective. There might be a different way in which you're not thinking about the problem. And maybe there is something more to it. Let's talk next time when you have an idea what this might be. Yeah. So, interactions with a real expert is a thing that can cause rage or disappointment. You've hired this extremely expensive consultant from outside, but they say that gRPC doesn't matter or Kafka is irrelevant because this is a different problem that we're solving. How dare the expert who is supposed to be so good not follow the rules? It leads to interesting conversations. It leads to also dissatisfaction because radicals will believe that they are so good that everybody has to think the same, or they are not good because they are the good ones. How do you teach somebody out of there? If able, force discomfort. Ideally, or a pattern that works for me with the people I've mentored out of there was overwhelm people with rules that they have to apply so that they see, I have to apply all the rules, I don't know which actually works. Then they panic, then they are unable to do anything. After some time, with some help, okay. Maybe there is an order in which we can apply them. Maybe they are actually not equally important, and maybe there is a way out. And then a picture starts to form, and people, okay, step by step, get out of there. Understanding of the wider picture, being able to see consequences, seeing which rules fit where, that helps. And then if somebody already has the initial steps, show the pain of doing something wrongly. And if they get the pain, if you see it on their faces, you know you're in a good spot. And I could talk about this more, but somebody also found this, made a series of blog posts and called it Expert Beginner. And it's an absolutely amazing series of blog posts, I think 4. If you want the slides, the URLs are there, so happy to share. What that person said about the expert beginner is an advanced beginner, so proper level 2, can do 2 things. Either they grow to level 3, so competent, and get the big picture and their place and they have the hierarchy, or actually no. Or actually they stay in that level and they do it so often that they become expert at being beginner. What is an expert beginner? It's a realization of Dunning-Kruger. If I don't understand the problem, then because all of the problems I understand are easy, then the problem also must be easy, therefore everything is easy. That's easy, that's easy, that's easy, that's easy. How do you pick a big project? Everything is easy. Because they don't know what the complexity is. They don't know how to deal with that because everything has been easy so far because they've been enjoying the early skill level, early learning phase. So an expert versus an expert beginner, if you put both of them in the room, it might be hard to tell them apart. Why? Because both will say it's easy, but they will mean different things. One of them might show some expertise using this way. One of them might show expertise using that way. One of them might be masking. So an example from software, Postgres is slowing down. Which answer is correct? Who was the expert? Well, let's see. Do we have buzzwords? Yes, we get buzzwords in both. Which one is the expert? Which one is the expert beginner? Can you tell? Not really, because it depends on the context, and what you cannot see is behind the hood. You cannot open the head and have a peek inside. It's very hard and quite damaging usually, which means you have to see what is the mental model that the person is working with. Just judging on how they communicate without trying and checking, it might be impossible to say. So what do you do? Well, expert beginners will reject more complex models by rejecting them openly because, hey, I know my ways. My way of doing projects is unorthodox, but it works for me. Or this is the way we've always done things. And yeah, those are best practices, but we don't really follow them because our company is special. Like, we're special is the thing that happens in software so often. Usually it doesn't apply. But creating the cognitive dissonance, so the differentiation between the best practices and us means, because we're in the us situation, we can use the special way, and then we get a carte blanche to do everything possible. Where are you likely to meet them? Communities which are very happy with themselves. Communities of a certain language, maybe framework, maybe something in which everybody says, yes, this is the best way to do software, we have nothing to learn anymore, we're the best, we're absolutely the greatest. Maybe an organization with little external experience because it doesn't change too often. Maybe people don't leave and don't join too much, which means they already are happy with themselves. They don't have an external point of reference, which means they believe that, hey, we've mastered what we can. And if they don't get the external sources, they don't have an external frame of reference, and then they believe this is what they are. So you might notice that, or you might have seen it in places. What do you do? Well, if you are interviewing somebody and you want to test where they are, or maybe you're talking to a colleague, you can see how much do they understand. Do they have a mental model? Do they know what happens if you push a system here? What happens later? And then can you work with that model? Is it static or is it dynamic? Can you say, we cut half of that, we replace it with something else, can you still follow? Can you see where the limits, what are the limits of their mental models? Do they know that there is a limit, or do they just lie their way out? How flexible? And you can see how strongly somebody will suggest, hey, maybe you're wrong. Maybe offer somebody a suggestion that's just bloody stupid, and see whether they tell you, hey, I don't believe this is an optimal solution, this is why. Or will they tell you, no, you've suggested I'm wrong, or you've suggested something nonsensical, I'm going radical. Naturally, radicals are the ones to avoid. So if you want to avoid becoming one, well, seek boundaries of your own knowledge, test it and try to bend and experiment. Expose yourself to other people and seek experts. Well, you're here, which means it's awesome. You're seeking external experience. And in hiring, there is a phrase called A players hire other A and A+ players, blah, 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 blah. Why it's not great? It's useful because people who do things well want to work with other people who do things well. And if you have good people and you have more good people, then you can, well, learn from all the interactions and enjoy the ride. Meetups and conferences, seeking feedback, having a devil's advocate in design rooms, in conversations and design meetings is another very useful thing. Somebody whose role is listen to us, don't interrupt us, but tell us, challenge us after. The great thing about that being a book and a series of blog posts is they already have written rules, and recommendations, which means I don't have to read them because you will get the slides if you drop me an email. L1s and L2s require an expert to learn. Then we get L4. After somebody has practiced the hierarchy and context often enough, they will become proficient. So like they've automated gear shifting, they will automate dealing with consequences and their complex mental models. Context is king. Making a decision becomes effortless. Intuition arises, so they will know things before they know how they know it because it's been so automated and ingrained. And they will follow best practices without knowing that they are actually doing that. So they are not actively following a rule. It will be just when you observe them, they will follow the rules anyway. Software examples, somebody has a feel that, hey, this system feels wrong. I don't know why. It will take me effort to tell you why it's going to fail, but I feel it just doesn't feel right. Or computer feels different. That actually, I've seen that happen within last year. Something about this machine feels wrong. Let's look at all the metrics. And then it turned out that the disk was underperforming. Somebody just felt that it feels wrong. And then, if all goes well, somebody might become an expert, which is internalized effortless knowledge, Zen of knowledge of a skill. Great. I could listen to your examples, but I could also say that somebody said that this is wrong. Sometimes somebody might say that there are problems with it, and then I would say yes. So problems with the model itself. First, levels are per skills. So skill in coding, skill in architecture, but they are kind of combined. Dreyfus model doesn't tackle it. There is also a phenomenon called faking. People can pretend to be another level. People can pretend to present themselves as, hey, I'm an expert. I use all the tools. I use all the fancy things. And it's hard to tell them apart. Also, experts are amazing to have, but experts, if the situation doesn't require that, will look like a proficient person, because if the problem is not really top of the top, they don't need to activate their expertise. And they are nice, but not always needed. They might be bored. It's a thing. So if the model is wrong, why is it useful? Because progression goes a bit like that. And if you've tried coaching software people and you've seen that pattern, it might resonate with you. It definitely resonates with me and people I've coached, and it has worked for me. If your experience is completely different, I would love to hear about it. Apply rules, first blindly, then noticing more, then notice context, then be able to make complex decisions with ease, and then develop a holistic view and automate thinking. And I mentioned faking. So what is faking in software, or using that? Speaking buzzwords, when levels try to talk about things they have no clue about, but they want to sound cool because they want to sound smart. Experts use YourKit. I use YourKit for my performance benchmarks. Why? Well, nobody's going to ask why, so I'm going to do it because, hey, it works. People think I'm great. Theory heavy, not having actual experience. I call this phenomenon, this is my name, theory of flight. You can read a book about how to fly an airplane. If you've not practiced, if you've not done it for real, it might not work. It takes effort to tell apart somebody who's just saying the correct fancy words. You have to test, you have to verify, and you have to see, is the knowledge superficial, or is there depth to it? And then nice thing or interesting thing is level 4s usually when they communicate, they will, if you ask them a question, they will ask for context, because they will want to know, okay, what kind of situation am I dealing with? Because I know that there is a myriad of situations and the details matter and I need it to feed my model. But if that question is asked by a level 2 or somebody who's still rule heavy, I just want a simple answer. Just tell me what is the correct way to do this project. And I will not tell you all the things because I don't know, because I never thought it's important. Which also tells us that, hey, if you're talking to different people, you have to see where they are, what are they wanting. So adjust the answer to the person asking the question. This is not rocket science, but it also, part of that stems from how people perceive the problem space. So recommendation is obviously listening and evaluating. Another aspect is experts communicating. If I know Michał is an expert in something, then we can skip a lot of the basic details because, hey, we know, I know he knows, I hope he knows I know, and I hope I know, which means we can talk about some things. We'll talk in code or what might come across as code to people who are elsewhere in the learning journey, which means we also might switch sides just to practice being devil's advocate to each other. It will sound like nonsense to somebody who's learning early on, which means rushing to judgment is not recommended. Another problem is experts take a lot of time to breed, and they need somebody who will entertain them intellectually. If you're in a big org, you'll probably have a community that will support it. I would look at certain large corporations, starting with different letters of the alphabet. But if in a small place, sometimes there might not be space for an expert, or if you're an expert in a small place, go to meetups, go to conferences, find things. And then limitations, more limitations. We're human. The fact that I might be an expert in Java because somebody gave me a nice polo, I still might have a bad day. I might have had a funeral. I might have stomach problems. You might not see, but I might be feeling very sick. It's not a uniform linear output. We're human. Give each other time and be mindful of that. Be nice to each other. So somebody who is an expert who has a lot of their family plate, their output might be somewhat different to the usual just because we're human. COVID brain fog, you know of that thing, which means if you're interviewing, sometimes an interview is going to be a random failure because it's a random failure. How does it apply to interviewing? Well, first, establish a base. Do people know the rules? Do people have the basic understanding of a problem? Do not ask people for verbatim quotes. Don't ask people for verbatim rules unless you're really shooting for juniors and people who are just going through the junior basic rule phase. And when somebody gives you an answer, work with that model. So which means you have to see, okay, what is your mental model of that problem? Okay, can you rotate it a bit? What happens then? What happens then? See where the boundaries are. Sometimes ask a completely radical question, ridiculous even. See if they say, hey, this makes no sense. Okay, good. How would you solve it then? And let's see what happens. Another problem is building a model that tests for the more experienced people is hard. You need more experienced people to interview other experienced people. Because if a junior asks somebody who is an expert about things that are relevant for a junior, the expert might not remember because maybe they've done this 20 years ago. Maybe they already forgot because those details actually don't matter that much. And if they answer in a real expert way, a very early young person, technically, might consider those questions boring, which means why should I even wake up for this interview? Or I'm just going to give you a terrible answer because you've asked me a terrible question. If I could, I would fall asleep because it would be great. At least it would be funny. Which means be careful. Another thing is people will fake, pretending to make decisions without understanding consequences. This is especially present with leads or people who do not have it in them, I would say, to be a lead. But they will pretend to make decisions because people expect them to make decisions. And they don't care. They don't see the consequences of their decisions. They never think about them. They will just decide whatever because they just want the problem gone away. Another aspect is level 3 faking. So somebody who's just learned to make decisions, they will struggle because it's a new activity for them. With that, you can force them to make a decision, then help them by adding criteria, help them evaluate and develop and build a mental model and build a feedback loop. Sadly, the model has shortcomings, and I mentioned that before. There is no expertise and skill in software. There is no expertise skill in Java. Even if you do exams, the point outcome at the end makes no sense. It's not really applicable to day-to-day work. Software as a skill, to me, is more of a skill tree. And years of experience are the most terrible gauge of all of them. Somebody might have 20 years of experience of doing exactly the same enterprise kind of work, and somebody might have 1 year in 20 different places, and some of them will be good, some of them will be bad, and people learn at different rates. People are different, so you have to treat everybody as an individual, which is why I hate HR kind of questions. We need a senior Java developer with 15 years of experience in Spring and something else and something else. You don't want years of experience. You want somebody who can operate at a certain level and have certain mental model, but you don't know how to express it, so you use years. So what should you do with that? Well, first, practice coaching on people. That's usually enjoyable. And be curious, and don't settle for the surface answer, because there is usually more behind it. Enjoy the rest of the track naturally, and yeah. I said memes are for me. If you want the slides, happy to share them. Drop me an email. Tell me what you thought about that. If you have any questions, I think we still have a couple of minutes.